Hey folks, welcome back to Ken Michaels Radio. A big thank you to all of you who have joined and subscribed. And I've been having so much fun, as you probably can tell, interviewing people in the Beatle world, lots of podcasters, lots of young podcasters, and authors, musicians, you name it. And I'll be adding plenty more interviews in the weeks ahead. My guest this time was a special guest a while back for show number 16 when he reviewed with me Paul McCartney's Driving Rain album. And that was a real fun show. Got a great reaction to that. And you know him for his many years on New Jersey's WFDU, where he hosts the Vintage Rock and Pop Shop on Sundays from 12 noon to 3 p.m. He's Dave Ghosty Wells. Welcome back to Ken Michaels Radio.
It's a pleasure to be here. I'm so glad that today I'm going to be talking about the genius of Sometime in New York City. And I'm just so thrilled. I'm kidding.
Actually,
although there's good stuff on that record. Yeah, there's good stuff on that record.
There is. There's great stuff on every solo album. But we're doing this on July the 6th, which is actually a special day in Beatle history when John and Paul first met each other. We should be doing a Lennon McCartney show today. But instead, Dave has said that he'd like to take part in, I guess it's becoming very popular now, the Fab Five concept, where he picks 5 albums, one from the Beatles, one from each solo Beatle, that are his go-to albums, the ones he wants to listen to right now in this moment. Before we do that, your show, I just want to tell you that when I do get the chance to listen Sundays, it's such an enjoyable show, and it's so different from everything else on the radio because you span so many decades. You go from the 40s through the 70s, and I never know what you're going to play, which is always a big thrill. I like unpredictability in radio.
Yes.
And I was just reminded, I never told you about this, but a few years ago, you played a song that I hadn't heard probably since the 70s or 80s. And it was an Edie Gourmet song.
Oh.
Tonight I'll Say a Prayer. And it took me back to when I used to listen to the radio. I still listen to the radio all the time, but with my parents in the car, and we'd listen to WNEW AM in the car, which were known for playing a lot of, adult standards now.
Sure.
Or what you might want to call middle of the road, all the Sinatra stuff, Barbra Streisand, the great crooners, Bing Crosby. And I would hear stuff like that. I was brought up on a lot of that music. And so to hear you play stuff like that, that's just one example. But it's such a joy to hear your music mix on Sunday afternoon. So if you want to give the folks just a brief description in case they're not familiar or they didn't catch the other show that you were on with me, you want to just say a few words about the Vintage Rock and Pop Shop?
I think you did it better than I could have done. And it's funny that you say that because I have heard from people who will request songs from the 40s or the very early 50s, the pop 50s before rock and roll hit, the Eddie Fishers and Nat King Coles and things. And they'll say, I didn't like this stuff at that time, but I remember being in the car with my parents listening to it. Yeah. I remember it being played in the house. And now, all these years later, this rock and roll snobbery has faded away. And now I get more nostalgic hearing a Doris Day record than I would a Rolling Stones record. Luckily on my show, however, you will hear both Doris Day and the Rolling Stones.
And that's my kind of radio, man. I like eclectic. I can listen to your show and hear the Andrews Sisters 1 minute and then hear Led Zeppelin.
Right.
And that's the way it should be. And I think that's been a big influence on me, being brought up on so many different styles of music and learning to appreciate it through so many influences, like my parents. But I'm so glad that you're doing this thing. And also for people who take a look at terrestrial radio and how it is now commercial radio. Even on oldies radio, you're lucky to hear 60s music, and 50s music has been abandoned. So you're going back to the 40s and mixing that with a lot of great 50s stuff that you just won't hear anymore unless you pay for satellite radio or Spotify or whatever. So, Thank you for doing all this great work.
Well, thank you for doing this show and things we said today and everything else you've got going on. So it's a mutual admiration society.
Yeah, I never
and
leave
talk
this
more
room.
talk.
Yeah,
That's right. Yeah, I can't forget talk more talk too.
So one more thing before we start the Fab Five. You are starting your own podcast, and
That
you're
is
doing
correct.
one on Cliff Richard, who I know you've been a big fan of. And you had, in fact, had sent me a CD
That's right.
a couple years ago of his early stuff, which I wasn't used to hearing. I was brought
Right.
up on Devil Woman,
Sure. Yeah.
the
70s
70s
Cliff. Yeah.
stuff, and We Don't Talk Anymore. Always loved Suddenly, the
With
duet
Olivia
with.
Newton-John. Yeah.
They sounded great together, but I wasn't really familiar with the early Cliff Richard. And you're not only a fan of him, but of early British rock pre-Beatles.
Sure. And in fact, his group, The Shadows, are a big part of what this podcast is, which is called We Say Yeah. It has not, at the time we're recording this, the first episode is not dropped, as the kids say. Soon will be, though, mid-month. It's just taking a lot of editing. But the idea here is to go chronological from the very first recordings in 1958 right up through the present day. So at the glacial pace I'm going, with one episode per month, I'm hoping that I can get some offspring, and they can inherit to this podcast. And eventually we can get to Devil Woman and We Don't Talk Anymore and those records, because we're going to be in the 50s, at least till the end of the year, I think, and then finally move into the 60s. But I will say that if you're a Beatles fan, it's certainly worth checking out, because in the first two episodes we recorded, the Beatles come up quite a bit, because there's a lot of connectivity between those two. Well, recording in the same studio 2, EMI London. The Shadows having the same tailor, Dougie Millings, all sorts of stuff, all sorts of connections. So it's always coming up.
Do you
and
prefer
Elvis too.
do you prefer Cliff's early work to what he did later, or how do you feel?
I do like some of the folks we're going to talk about today. I do like that there's a longevity and a willingness to experiment with different styles and have different eras and things like that. Right now, if I have to be honest, I sort of like Cliff in the mid to late 60s. That's my favorite period right now, where he's doing some originals, but also covers of songs that were popular at the time, like Concrete and Clay and things like that. That's kind of what I'm into right now. But I do like the rebirth of Cliff with Devil Woman and Miss Unites and those things. But again, since we're going and the reason we're doing it chronologically is because it just has not been done. I was listening to, as you know, there are so many Beatles podcasts now. It's almost ridiculous. There's so many of them. And there are now more Elvis podcasts, and pretty much everybody you can think of, there's multiple podcasts devoted to them. And for someone as big as Cliff and the Shadows were, for there to be nothing, I said, well, we're going to have to be ground zero and start right at the very beginning and go track by track.
That's shocking. Now, you would think out of the UK, somebody would want to do it.
I have to take that back. I take it back. There is one. It's an outgrowth of an internet radio 24/7, Cliff Richard and the Shadows internet radio station.
Okay.
And it's called Wired for Sound by a host named Paul Dyer. And he does tremendous interviews with people who worked with Cliff or, DJs and that sort of thing, which we won't be doing on our show, but you can certainly hear that on his program, which is highly recommended.
Well, this begs the question, since you've done so many interviews, which is another side of your career, you've done a ton of interviews in pop culture, film actors, television actors, musicians. Did you ever interview Cliff?
Yes, twice.
Oh, okay. What was that like?
Yep. It was great. It's a very strange thing to get a phone call with a strange number and pick it up and go, "Hi, it's Cliff Richard." You're like, this is one of the biggest selling recording artists of all time. And it's funny, I was just talking with someone on my show who wrote a book on David Cassidy. And I had kind of the same experience when David Cassidy called in, and I pick up the phone.
Too. Yeah.
Thank you. And I heard that, and hey, it's David Cassidy, and I'm like, David Cassidy. I became 4 years old again for a moment. I'm thinking that voice. I've heard it so much. It's so much a part of my life. That's always a thrill when that happens.
Great. I'm so glad you got to talk to him. You should. Such a big fan.
Yeah, he was great.
All right, so let's move on to our main topic here, which is our Fab Five show. I'm going to ask you. We'll start with Ringo. What is your go-to album today?
Okay,
July 6th, 2021. In case we come back a year from now,
right,
and compare it.
So in some of these cases, right, I think the gist of it, as you explained it, is these are the favorites, the go-tos right now, not necessarily putting on our critics' hats and thinking these are the best. I actually do think that not only is this my favorite, my go-to, but I think it is Ringo's best. And it's probably not what everybody's expecting. And it's Vertical Man.
Wow.
1998. I love this record. And if I go to a track on this, I go to track 2, What in the World, featuring McCartney. I know that for some fans, Mark Hudson hung around too long, or there's a complaint that it's too Beatleish. I think that's insane. Nothing can be too Beatleish for me. So I love those records he made with Mark Hudson. This, of course, is the big one. And even the cover of Drift Away, I enjoy. I love I'm Yours. The version of Love Me Do, okay, whatever. But King of Broken Hearts is fantastic. I just think this is an incredibly, incredibly strong record. So Vertical Man would be even more than the Ringo album. This is the one I go to.
That's a pretty powerful statement. There are a lot of people who, fans are so divided. But there are people who think, he's a Beatle, sound like a Beatle, be proud of it. And that's what Mark Hudson tried to do. Scream it to the heavens if you have to.
Right.
But then, sometimes if you think like an artist does, you don't want to rely on past successes and formulas. You want to move on. And so, I've gone on record saying that besides the Ringo album and Time Takes Time, those 3 albums that he did with Mark Hudson are 3 of his best. But I'm thinking in terms of the compositions, how strong they were, how suitable it was for Ringo, how great the musicians were to back him up, the Roundheads in particular. They all had a feel for what worked for Ringo, but it was very Beatleish, those 3 albums, Choose Love and Ringo Rama, in addition to Vertical Man. But then again, it's like a breath of fresh air when he left Mark Hudson. And it's like 2 different worlds, because you don't hear too many songs that are very Beatley after that.
Right. Well, you didn't hear too many that were very Beatley before that either. I mean, Bukus of Blues is not, doesn't sound like a Beatles track. The Ringo album has elements of that, obviously, because you have actual Beatles involved, like you do here. But, he'd already done that. He'd already done the let's not sound like the Beatles. So it was fun when he came back and sounded like the Beatles. So I was fully on board. I'm fully on board with those 3 records, as I am really with pretty much anything Ringo does. I think Ringo's so underrated. I think his solo career, especially from Time Takes Time on, I know I'm preaching to the choir here, but I think his solo career from that point on, not like his other stuff was bad, but from that point on signaled the rebirth of Ringo, the solo artist, and he's been strong ever since. I mean, I like Liverpool 8. I could just go on and on with all the Ringo records I like.
No, I agree
Why
with
not?
you totally.
Yeah.
There you go. And even you mentioned One in the World, which is one of my favorite Ringo songs. And you
Love
noticed that Joe Walsh did the slide guitar in there, sounding very much like George, probably intentional. But Yeah, and King of Broken Hearts obviously has George on it, and I'll Be Fine Anywhere, which also has George, is a terrific track too. The whole album really is very solid
Yeah.
all throughout. So good. I'm glad that you picked that one. I was figuring you might go with Time Takes Time because everybody seems to be mentioning Time Takes Time on this channel, and I'm real happy to see that because I think it's a great album. But I like being surprised too. But
Well, I just
still a
did an
choice.
interview or a podcast appearance on a film podcast where we counted down the top 10 Marlon Brando, your favorite Marlon Brando films.
Uh-huh.
And I was accused of being perverse in my choices because I did choose some odd movies that people don't really talk about, like The Nightcomers from 1972 and things like that. And I have a feeling some of that same vibe is going to leak into this. So I don't think my choices are going to be everybody else's, but we'll see. We'll see.
Well, it's always interesting to me when I talk to someone that knows the full catalog
Mm.
of the solo Beatles, because there are a lot of people that don't really listen that carefully or listen once or twice to certain albums and then judge them, unfortunately. All right, let's do John next.
Okay. Well, this one might be on everybody's list because this album I first got, it's the second John Lennon solo album I ever heard. The first one was Rock and Roll, which I bought, or it was given to me at a time when I was going through that sort of rock and roll revival, and Sha Na Na was popular
Uh-huh.
and things like that. And I have to admit, disappointed in that record. I wanted it to rock a little harder. So I was wary about the next John Lennon cassette that was given to me, but I loved it, and I love it even more now. And it's maybe my, Plastic Ono Band I feel is his best. So I'm going to put this at number 2, very close to Plastic Ono Band, but it's my go-to always, and it's Walls and Bridges.
Very nice.
With this cover, the CD. And I mentioned the rock and roll album, maybe not rock in some cases, yes, but Do You Want to Dance was very slow. It was like the Bette Midler thing.
Actually, I liked her version.
Yeah, it was good.
It really worked, and yeah, I think John's was kind of reggae-ish.
But what you got on here?
Oh yeah.
If I had had a whole album like that, but everything on here is great. I remember the first time I heard Going Down on Love, and I was like, what is this? What? I said, John Lennon singing about going down on love. All you need is love. And now we're going down on love. What happened? I didn't know, any of the story. Whatever gets you through the night. I'm like, whatever. We went from Give Peace a Chance to whatever gets you through the night. There's not a bad cut on this, as far as I'm concerned. I mean, I guess you could say yeah, but even that's fun. Nobody Loves You When You're Down and Out. I know that Lennon had said that Frank Sinatra would have cut it or should have cut it. Right. Absolutely. And I'm not a fan of Sinatra cutting rock records or songs by rock artists. I really feel like he was at his peak when he was doing, Cole Porter and the Gershwins. Yeah. However, this is so tailor-made for Frank Sinatra. It's just a crime he never recorded it. Steel and Glass, Old Dirt Road. I could always listen to this, always.
So Frank would have been more suitable with Nobody Loves You When You're Down and Out over Suicide.
Yes. I can't see Frank recording Suicide. And if that's true, that like McCartney said that he sent that to him and word got back that Frank said something like, is this guy having me on? Yeah, I can understand it. Frank has recorded a lot of morose material. He has an album, an actual LP called No One Cares. If a song called Suicide is going to be on it now, it's probably that one. But that song is maybe a little too jaunty. It would have been interesting to hear Frank attempt it. But I really do think he would have nailed Nobody Loves You When You're Down and Out.
I agree. I think it really could have worked for him. I also never heard the word ruinide until Paul came up with it.
Yeah,
is there such a word as ruinide?
I don't know. He's come up with a couple of things like that. I'm still trying to figure out some of the mumbling in Uncle Albert. but also on this particular, this CD has like the John interview. I don't remember what this one came out. This is early 2000s or something.
I think about 2004, 2005, I'm guessing.
But we talked about Beatley, and of course, Number 9 Dream is a very Beatlesque, and I think John even said that at the time, that it was the Beatle cut on this record. Yeah. So there you go. There's another example of a Beatle being very Beatle.
I'm always a big fan whenever anyone gives attention to Mind Games and Walls and Bridges, that whole period, because everybody points to, and John said it several times, that Plastic Ono Band and Imagine are his best albums, and then there was Double Fantasy. Like everything in the middle there wasn't nearly as good, and I completely disagree. There's some real gems on both Mind Games and Walls and Bridges. And Walls and Bridges was really masterfully produced, I think. The sound on Number 9 Dream and Scared and certain songs like that.
I have issues with production on John Lennon records, particularly Imagine. I'll go on record. I think this is a better album than Imagine. So I would put this above Imagine on that list. I don't know about Mind Games, might even be tied with Imagine. We talked about, did we talk about it once? Or maybe I just heard you talk about it. The fact that I Know has become like this song that people gravitate toward, and it was never
Out the Blue.
Out the Blue. Oh, yeah. That's the one, right?
I wish I Know was.
Right. Well, that's next.
Well, I Know was put on the latest compilation, the Give Me Some Truth one, which and so was Out the Blue. I was very happy to see that. So
Free to People was always my favorite off the Mind Games album.
Another good one. Yeah, definitely. So I'm glad you picked that one. Excellent choice. Okay. Why don't we do Paul next?
Okay.
The toughest one.
It is. There's so much to choose from. And all right. So this is not his greatest. However, it's an album that I remember the first time I heard it. All of these, by the way, I had on cassette before CD. So the first time I heard it, I was very thrilled. I was in Massachusetts visiting relatives. And at the time, I think Paul had just signed with Capitol again in the States. So all of his stuff on Columbia, on cassette, was marked down to $4.99 in the bargain bin. So I was going bananas collecting all the McCartney. And the first time I heard Red Rose Speedway, I was blown away. I love this record. And the fact with the re-release, we get the bonus material that could have been part of a double album only makes it better. I know that this is one of those records that in the early 70s, at the time when this was released, it was criticized. I really think that was a very juvenile time in our nation's history when we were criticizing records like this. I don't think, with the possible exception of Loop First Indian on the Moon, I don't think there's a track on here I would ever skip. Not a single one. Yes, My Love was overplayed, but not anymore. It's not overplayed anymore. So It sounds fresh to me. Only One More Kiss. I like Paul Going Country. I'm all for it. Get on the Right Thing. When the Night, big gospel-y rave ups. Love it. I know Little Lamb Dragonfly, you've always talked about as one of your favorites.
Gorgeous tune. Gorgeous.
Single Pigeon. That, maybe not Sinatra, maybe Andy Williams could have done it, but whatever. Single Pigeon is just a wonderful little song, almost like a Harry Nilsson song, that sort of slice of life, life's a little moment type of song. And I'll tell you, I'll never forget reading a bad review of the medley at the end. And I think those people are insane. That beginning of Hold Me Tight, I've waited all my life for you. That is heaven. That is heaven. It's just perfect. And then it goes into this rollicking, I almost see it like maybe in Foul Play or Seems Like Old Times. Like it could have been in one of those Chevy Chase Goldie Hawn movies playing in the background. And then each of those little snippets, I know people say, they're They're just these little pop things. Yes, they are. They're masterpieces of pop.
Hmm.
Hands of Love. Oh, that could have just been one little song. I would have just liked that as a song. That could have been a single.
Right.
Lazy Dynamite's fantastic. Power Cut. And then the stuff that was put on the archive edition, like Best Friend. Are you kidding me? Why was that not put out? I mean, it's just all of this stuff is incredible. So, yeah, Red Rose Speedway. I like it. Well, I will say that I like it almost as much as I think Venus and Mars. I consider his best of that early Wings period, or best of his work of the 70s. But my go-to is always Red Rose Speedway.
Interesting comments there. And you're voicing the opinion of a lot of people these days, and on a lot of Beatle podcasts, where fans have noticed that so many of Paul's B-sides and unreleased songs could be considered better than what he put on the actual albums. And I'm always reminded of something, and this just stays in my head, what Alan Kozin has told me on Things We Said Today, because he talked to Paul about this, all these bonus tracks that he puts out, and why does he do that? And Paul said that these are all his songs, they're his babies, he likes all of them. It's not like he could say, well, this is so much better than another song. He just generally likes, most of his material. And in the case of Red Rose Speedway, I know I've said this a number of times, but Denny Sywell said the band chose the songs that were on the album. So I'm not sure if they picked all the sequencing. I think they were very concerned about how well the album flowed, and it does flow really well, especially since once you get used to it. But I definitely echo your opinions there. And the medley at the end is beyond brilliant. And it kind of reminds me in many ways of when you hear overtures and musicals, and you combine all these different melodies and you string them all together in a way that flows and it makes sense. And at the very end of that medley, all four songs come together.
Right, exactly.
And this is brilliant, and the fact that he has the mind for stringing them all together. There are those fans who think these are half-finished songs and therefore there's no value to them. But the only thing that really matters in the end, as I've said, is the end result. And should we all think that the songs on side 2 of Abbey Road in those medleys were not worth our while? No, they all worked together extremely well. They had a purpose. And so, yeah, Paul is a master at doing these medleys. And I just
you could have separated them out. I would have liked Power Cut just as a track. I mean, I'm fine with that. Lazy Dynamite, I would love as a track.
Yeah, when he released Egypt Station, and the end of it, he had that medley of 3 songs, and the first one, Hunt You Down, is this great rocker. I'm kind of disappointed that it cuts off and goes into another song. He could have made one full song out of that. And I sometimes wonder why he didn't just finish it and make one song and thought that it would work as a medley. But in the end, it does. It's kind of jarring in that medley, but yeah.
The contender for, if it wasn't going to be Red Rose Speedway, the other go-to record for me is Off the Ground, which I just love more and more and more as the years go by. And tracks that I didn't care for or I thought were just okay are now my favorites, like Peace in the Neighborhood. Or I Owe It All to You, which is like, how is that not a single? How is this not a song that is played at everybody's wedding? I mean, it's unbelievable. And Golden Earth Girl. Golden Earth Girl. I mean, talk about Beatles-ish. I mean, that, my God, that easily could have come off of the White Album. Whatever. Anyway, that would have been my, if it wasn't Red Rose Speedway, it would be Off the Ground. And that's another one with all that bonus material. I can't wait for the archive edition to that, because now I don't need it because I bought the singles. I was crazy. But for the people who have never heard, I can't imagine Sweet, Sweet Memories, Kicked Around No More, all of that material, they're going to have their minds blown.
Yep. It's really great for the new fans who are discovering this stuff, and realizing, hey, why wasn't this on the album? But yeah, lately I've been going to YouTube and playing Kicked Around No More a lot, and Style and Long Leather Coat. I mean,
it's Big Boys
should have been a double album.
Absolutely.
Okay. How about going to the Beatles, and then we'll save George for last.
Okay. So this is a caveat. Um, my the album that I consider the best album that the Beatles ever made is A Hard Day's Night. I consider that their absolute best. I know it's very fashionable for people to always go for post Rubber Soul records, but for me, that album is so tight. It's so perfect. The only track on there that's slightly weaker than everything else is When I Get Home. And it's just barely, and it's mainly the lyrics that are a little, but other than that, that one's perfect. However, it is not my go-to. If it was going to be my go-to, it would be the American version, because I like being reminded of the film and I love the George Martin score. So my go-to is this, but not this version. I don't have a CD of the American version of Rubber Soul. I apologize. Years ago, I was one of those insufferable fans who would go onto message boards and leave comments in YouTube videos if anybody said anything positive about the American albums. I was one of those people who said, how dare you? That's not what the Beatles intended. And if you had any sense, if you were a true fan, you would only listen to the British releases. The American albums are an abomination. Mea culpa, mea culpa, mea culpa. As I've gotten older, I've been trying to recapture some of the mystery of the Beatles when I first got into them, and some of the magic of when I first was listening to the Beatles. I kept thinking to myself, it was a couple of years ago, I was thinking, am I just so burnt out on this? I mean, I feel like I never have to listen to Sgt. Pepper ever again. I could just do like this for 20 seconds ago. Yeah, I've heard the whole album. It's just so tattooed on my brain.
Yeah.
And then just by chance, I was listening to the American Hard Day's Night with the George Martin score. And I thought, oh, this gives me such a good feeling. Then I started listening to the American Rubber Soul. And I was just thinking, I can't imagine a world where I've Just Seen a Face does not open that record. I know that that world is the real world. But when I heard it in that sequence again, as crazy as it sounds, it brought back the feels, in a way that the British version doesn't. Even though I've heard Richard Buskin scoff and say, oh, version of Rubber Soul, it doesn't have Nowhere Man. Oh, that. But I'm telling you, a version of Rubber Soul that doesn't have It's Only Love. Are you kidding me? Those songs were rescued from side 2 of Help and given such a prominent place. And for me, it's the American version. It's the American version of Rubber Soul that inspired Brian Wilson and Pet Sounds. It wasn't the British version. He heard the American version.
Right.
So it's, yes, it's a capital creation, but they got this one right.
It's funny. My last guest, Hudson Raney, who does a podcast show, I know, said the same thing. His go-to was the American Rubber Soul.
Oh, okay.
And he loved the album starting off with I've Just Seen a Face. And I was brought on that as well. I've gotten used to the British ones once the CDs came out in 1987. But yeah, there is something about how your brain automatically triggers right after I've Just Seen a Face, I hear Norwegian Wood in my head.
Right.
Right after It's Only Love, I hear Girl. And it must be, I don't know why that particular album more than the other American albums that I was brought up on as well. But yeah, I understand that. It gave it more of a folk feel to kick off the album with that. It's not just a great opening song, which it is, but to start off a song with that acoustic feel to it really helped to galvanize it as an acoustic folk album. So yeah, I understand. I'm not going to disagree, but I find it really interesting whenever anybody will mention an American version. Sometimes I think, even though I haven't done it for a long time, because when the CDs came out in 1987, I barely touched the American albums at all ever again after that. But I could see myself digging up Meet the Beatles,
Oh,
since
Meet the
that was my,
Beatles.
it
Oh, it's
was
so good.
it was the first album I was brought up on. I'm used to that order,
Yep.
and I'm used to Not a Second Time being the last song on the
Yes. Yes.
album.
Yes.
Little things like that seem to matter. But and I Want to Hold Your Hand kicking it off. But I could see myself going to that.
I'm going to say, here's my controversial statement. With the exception of the archive releases, I will henceforth from this moment on only be listening to the American versions of the albums, because I just want to go back to that. I want to go back to the way I first heard them. They're so, like, Meet the Beatles, the mono version of Meet the Beatles is just, there's hardly anything better than that. I want to hear Yesterday and Today as an album. I mean, I know it isn't. I know intellectually that it is not an album, but I want to hear that. I want to hear Beatles' second album with all that reverb on top of it. The only thing I maybe don't want to hear is the I Feel Fine and She's a Woman with the fake stereo. But and Beatles 65. People talk about how Beatles for Sale, oh, well, they retired and, it's not that great or whatever. But Beatles 65, that record is so strong with those cuts on there. And I'll Be Back, rescuing it from, and I love the British A Hard Day's Night. It's their best album. But taking that and putting it on Beatles 65, and I know there are going to be hardcore fans who are going to hear this and think that I have just lost my mind. I'm no longer invited to the party. I've lost my seat at the table of ideas because I am now fully embracing the American albums. But that's how I want to hear them. I want to hear them in that sequence, and that's how I want to relive it. I don't have them anymore, so I'll have to get to work on getting them. I'll have to not get that box set that didn't use the right mixes. I'll have to get the other two.
It's very interesting. I've said this before, and I'm sure a lot of fans will disagree with this, but the Beatles catalog, the songs are so strong that they could work in just about any sequence, and your mind will get used to it. And when you think about it, a lot of the American albums use some of the same sequencing as they did the
Right.
British albums, with some changes. It's just how you're brought up, and your ears become used to a certain order. I've made mixtapes back in my days of cassettes
Sure.
and CDs, and I mix songs together, group and solo. I become used to it that way.
Right.
Really what matters is that the songs are strong.
And here's something that's crazy. In 1982, there was a box set released by, I think it was World Music, called the Beatles Box. And it was just pruned down versions of Beatle albums. I think there was 6 or 7 of them. And I've never seen it. It's like a facsimile box that says From Liverpool on it. And I covet that. I want that so badly. I could make it. I have all of these songs. In the age of iTunes, I could just put it together. Even if you didn't own it, you could just go to Spotify and create it. But I want that sequence. For some reason, I've become a sequence slut. And I'm just fully into the sequencing of these things. And yeah, it's the American albums for me. Aside from the archive editions, of course.
That's the first time I've heard that term before. Sequence slut.
That's what I am.
You heard it first here, folks.
Yep, absolutely.
Coming from Dave. All right. And what we're talking about here is always debatable because of the fact that the Beatles reached a point where they became involved with the sequencing of the songs. So you'd want to hear the album the way that they put it together. But at the same time, I've always maintained, just like when I do a radio show, I mix all the music. I love it any way you present it to me.
Sure.
But when you're talking about one body of work, one album, which ones you prefer with those songs, that's why I enjoy doing a show like this. But yeah, I'll be curious to see how many other people, especially young people, the fact that Hudson knew an American album,
Right.
how many of them really want to take the time to listen to how it was released that far back?
Well, that's a
So
thing that, if you're someone who's into trying to experience things the way fans at the time when these things were happening were experiencing them,
mhm.
you would want to, I would think, just like, you'd want to go back and hear a Beatle record the way it was released in America in 64, how those kids experienced it. I mean, if you were really into the history of it, and I would think that these younger people who are doing podcasts are obviously into the historical aspect of this. Now, I was fortunate, I said, or unfortunate, depending on what side you're on, that the American albums is the first thing I ever heard. So I'm just always going to feel that way about them. And I've gone down the rabbit hole and I've come out the other side. So I've gone down the rabbit hole of only the British releases and anything else is an abomination to God. But now I've returned home to the American releases.
Okay. We'll see how you feel 10 years from now. Maybe you'll be
Oh,
having a different opinion.
next week it'll be different, I'm sure. Only the Canadian releases. Yeah.
It's interesting how you pointed out A Hard Day's Night, because of the early stuff that's so bright and punchy, and the
Yes.
fact that, and I don't want to say anything negative about the cover versions, but the fact that it was all original makes
Right.
it even more fresh in my mind.
And the American version, which includes the score, listen, that film, A Hard Day's Night, is in my top 5 favorite movies of all time. And anything that can remind me, and I love George Martin's score. I know that there are people who don't like, I'm a fan of the American Help album. I like hearing the film soundtrack music in there because it puts me in the mind of the film. The British A Hard Day's Night doesn't really do that. The British A Hard Day's Night is an incredible collection of really tight, uniform sounding songs that are all top notch, that are just all incredible. But the American one is literally like the soundtrack to the movie.
Sure.
Both Hard Day's Night and Help. And I love those movies and I want to relive them. So those are my go-to versions.
Good points. I love the George Martin stuff. This Boy especially.
Yes.
Really brilliantly produced, that whole arrangement.
And I interviewed Vic Flick, who played that.
Oh, yes.
Yes, I interviewed him. Yeah.
Very nice. Okay, so we are left with George.
This is going to be another somewhat controversial pick for my go-to George.
Electronic sound.
It's the Wonderwall soundtrack. No, some people consider this record inauthentic, but it's my go-to because it was released posthumously. There's a sense that, how do we know if this is what George wanted? George maybe wouldn't have done it this way, and it was finished for him, and yada, yada, yada. But as far as I understand, George left instructions for Danny on how he wanted this put together. So as far as I'm concerned, Brainwashed is as much a George Harrison album as any other album in his catalog. I love this record. I always thought this was so incredibly strong. Any Road, unbelievable. P2 Vatican Blues last Saturday night. How that was not a hit single, I'll never know. Pisces Fish, fantastic. Of course, Marwood Blues didn't he receive a
Grammy award,
instrumental Grammy, right? And I love when George does covers, and he always will do non-rock and roll covers, and will do covers from an earlier age, so like True Love and things like that. And Between the Devil and the Deep Blue Sea, wonderful cover. And I think that was rescued from earlier.
With Jules Holland on it for his
TV
show. Yeah.
But I love this record. I mean, I wish people would get into this one more. For some reason, it seems to have slipped through the cracks, like a lot of posthumous albums. I mean, there's a Queen album called Made in Heaven that people just don't consider a real album because, sort of half finished and the band finished it off. And I do have just an interest in that sort of thing. And even the cover art, everything about it. I would say, I mean, for me, this is a stronger album than Cloud Nine, which I know a lot of people really, really love.
Surprising.
Yeah, I mean, I just love this record. Anyway, that's it. Brainwashed. That's my go-to George.
Yeah, another great choice. And I do think that it is true that George left instructions for Danny and for Jeff Lynne. And, he did say he wanted it to be less posh. Those were the words. As far as Jeff Lynne's production is concerned, it's much more restrained, Jeff Lynne's production. But I do feel like if George lived to see it through, that's what it would have sounded like. And
Yeah.
And even though there are some older songs on there,
Right.
like Stuck Inside a Cloud and Run So Far, and like you said, Between the Devil and the Deep Blue Sea and all that, they all really work together well. It's a consistently strong album. You wouldn't know that Stuck Inside a Cloud, from what I understand, because I always, in my head, I keep hearing Jim Keltner talk about the song, that it was a song he heard in the late 70s. You'd never know it was a song from the late 70s. It fits on this particular album. Same thing with Run So Far. It's strong all the way throughout. And, it's once George kind of knew that the end was near, he wanted to make sure that this album was done. So maybe it became a top priority. That's the thing. If George had lived, we have no idea if he ever would have put out another album, because after Cloud Nine, he gave us the 2 albums with the Traveling Wilburys and the live album with Eric Clapton, the Best of Dark Horse. But as far as a studio album of all new material, he didn't do anything at all. He didn't release anything. So, it's just sad that it took his passing to make this a priority, or, knowing that he was going to pass away or coming close to it. But he left us with a real gem. And I think Jeff Lynne and Danny deserve a ton of credit for the way that it sounds.
And I know that a lot of people are down on Jeff Lynne's sound, but it's very restrained on this record. I mean, it doesn't sound like Traveling Wilburys,
No.
the Brainwashed album. It has its own flavor.
Yeah,
so
I've talked
but
about
let me show
that.
you. Let me show you. Actually, hold on for one moment here.
Okay.
This, in actual fact, though, this is my favorite album of all time, right here. Murray the K's. If we're talking Beatles, Murray the K's, Golden Dancers. I just noticed I had this in the corner. I had to work that in.
I've seen that before, but I've never played it.
I've never played it either. The Moon Glows are on here. The Students doing So Young. The Tune Weavers doing Happy Happy Birthday Baby. This might be my favorite new record. Anyway, but only the British
part
version.
of the Beatles catalog.
Right, exactly. Well, he wore this hat in the first U.S. visit, the Maysles Brothers thing. So yeah, this is a Beatle record, sure. Anyway, I didn't mean to interrupt you.
With Best of the Beatles.
Right. I wanted to get that in before we finished here today.
Yeah. So really, this has been great. I love your choices there.
Thank you.
I like when it's sometimes a combination of what you expect and then a few surprises thrown in. And, with most of my guests on this show, it's been just that. So this has been absolutely wonderful having you as a guest again. We'll have to have you on again. Maybe we can review another album. Think about that.
Yeah,
that'd be fun. Like to really talk about that. Maybe
what would be your favorite live Ringo album?
There is no. It's very tough to tell the difference between one and another. I hate to say this because I enjoy listening to the live albums, but with Ringo, it's more a visual experience, seeing whatever band he has at the moment, seeing just that combination and them interacting on stage. And that's part of the fun of seeing Ringo live. If you were to play Yellow Submarine from the third All-Star Band and not tell me which band it was from, I couldn't tell you. It's not like I'm going to say, hey, I can pick Felix Cavallari in there. You know,
Right.
you know?
Right.
But I like hearing live versions from the other members, and it's good to have certain songs that you can only get live on these live albums. It's just certain songs are only they're rarities too, because he doesn't go deep into his studio albums when he tours. So when you get Don't Go Where the Road Don't Go, it's nice to have a live recording of that, a song like that. So yeah, I like listening to them. It's no contest when it comes to McCartney. Wings Over America tops them all for me, and he's released a number of live ones. I wish he'd release more though. But
I will say that tied, no, not tied, but my next after Wings Over America is the expanded live at Amoeba. I
that's a
really love
great
that.
one.
Yeah, I really love that.
Yeah, and his voice was really strong
Yes.
at that show. Kind of a different arrangement of Coming Up too,
Yep.
and yeah, what's the song from Memory Almost Full that he did early on? That House of Wax. He did that at
House
that
of
show, right?
Wax, right?
That's an
Right.
amazing song live. Oh God, wish he
And
kept that
Calico
in his set.
Skies, the full band version of Calico Skies is
Yeah,
on that, right? Yeah.
yep. Well, he's done that on a lot of tours, Calico Skies.
Yeah.
I actually kind of
That's a
like.
really good record.
I like the studio version of Calico Skies more. I don't really
Oh,
like it as
sure.
much with an accordion. I don't know. I like just an acoustic guitar with Calico Skies, but
Now, here's one last question
okay.
as I turn the tables here on you. Before we go, Christmas is coming. I know it's the middle of summer. It is coming. Well, it's always coming at some point.
Uh-huh.
And where is Ringo's Christmas album? Where's I Want to Be a Santa Claus? Where did that record go? Because as a Christmas record, shouldn't that be a perennial? Isn't that the idea that always shows up in stores around Christmas time? That
It should
album
be.
has vanished. Yeah, it's vanished.
I think it's long been out of print, but I actually haven't checked enough to tell you. It's a shame because every year when I'm on the air, of course I wasn't last year with my live show, but with my syndicated Beatles show, Every Little Thing, I always put songs from I Want to Be Santa Claus in there. Yeah, it should be in print if it isn't already. Um, that should always stay available.
Yeah,
It's
it's
it's a
gone. I
real
haven't seen
gem.
it.
Hmm.
Yeah, I know there was a re-release where they did it like Ringo Millennium Christmas or something,
Right.
and made it look
Yeah.
like a budget release. And that was the last I saw of it in stores, and that's a long time ago.
Yeah. I think that it's another thing I'm grateful to Mark Hudson for, to get Ringo to do that
Yeah.
and to work with him, and the whole format of that album being half
Yep.
traditional and half original. And the original songs are fantastic.
Yeah,
I
that's
mean,
a great. I mentioned that because it's I'm talking about Vertical Man and Mark Hudson. That's
yeah.
a very strong album. Setting aside the Christmas aspect, it's a
Uh-huh.
very strong record.
I mean, we always hear Happy Christmas and Wonderful Christmas Time. I think, as much as I love I Want to Be Santa Claus, which is a great song to itself, very Harry Nilsson-esque too.
Sure, sure.
Christmas Eve, what a
Yeah, it's
killer
wonderful.
ballad. And that reminds me of Harry Nilsson's Christmas song, you know? Uh, gorgeous. Absolutely. That would be a standard. If
Yeah.
that had been a single at the same time as Happy Christmas and radio stations had played it, you'd be hearing it a lot more frequently, on the
I'm
radio.
surprised that they don't, even on Christmas compilations. There's nothing from the Ringo album. Even the Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, where he screws up and says Ringo or whatever he says. Doesn't he do that on there? Is it Rudolph where he
No,
screws up and
he,
says
he,
Ringo?
Winter Wonderland, he does.
Oh yeah.
Uh,
No, it's
the
he goes instead of
Little
Rudolph,
Drummer
it's
Boy.
Santa.
Yeah.
Yes, that's in that. Yeah, he goes Santa. No, Rudolph. He screws up on it, and they left it in.
Oh,
That's like a little fun moment on that. So, yeah, I don't know why that's vanished, but that should also come out. Anyway,
definitely. All right. So thank you so much for doing this. And we welcome you back again sometime in the near future. And best of luck with this new podcast on Cliff Richard.
oh, thank
And
you. Yeah.
I'm going to put in the description box where the link for WFDU so people can listen to you Sundays from 12 noon to
Yes.
3 Eastern time. And thanks so much again. And we'll see you soon. And thanks to everybody for watching. And please subscribe if you haven't done so already. And we'll see you next time.
Bye.